Rutte arrived in Ukraine and addressed the Verkhovna Rada amid a Russian strike. We'll talk about this with Andriy Dobriansky, chair of UN Affairs at the Ukrainian World Congress. Andriy, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Andriy, Russia cynically carried out a strike just one day before the negotiations and the arrival of NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte during the coldest days of winter, completely ignoring President Trump's request not to shell Ukraine amid severe frost. It is clear that the main objective was to exert pressure on Ukraine ahead of the talks, to demonstrate force and to push demands related to Donbass. Ukraine has repeatedly rejected such demands, and it is highly unlikely that this attack will alter Ukrainians' position at the negotiating table. As a result, in temperatures of minus 20 degrees, elderly people, children, and persons with disabilities are once again suffering. Meanwhile, Russians openly celebrate this as a good day. Did Russia use the American proposal for a pause in strikes not for diplomacy, but to stockpile missiles and wait for the peak of freezing temperatures in Ukraine? Your opinion?
Well, we know that there were still plenty of casualties that happened during whatever period of pause they said that they were agreeing to. So in one aspect that they were lying to President Trump. On the other hand, we also know that they are struggling with their military supplies as well. Many of the missiles that have been discovered falling on Ukraine just in the last couple of weeks have been verified to have been manufactured only in the last month. This is not large stockpiles that they've had for many years. Now they are struggling with their defensive supplies as well. So any kind of pause in attacking Ukraine will allow them to build up their arsenal to once again unleash a massive barrage against Ukraine whenever they want to. There are many problems with this negotiation, but the chief one, we need to return to the fact that they are not acting in good faith. They are not demonstrating to any of the international partners that they are interested in finishing this war. They are only interested in finishing the Ukrainian people, breaking their spirit, and having Ukraine surrender. These are the actions that they've demonstrated repeatedly.
And really, it is important to emphasize that this was terror ahead of a new round of negotiations. Will there be a response from the White House, from President Trump, not merely in words, but through concrete actions to these latest acts of terror? How do you think?
Unfortunately, I don't foresee any kind of response. He, in fact, yesterday was saying that he repeated the statement that he had a conversation with President Putin last week, that there would be a pause in the fighting, a pause in the civilian shelling of Ukraine. And clearly that has not happened. Clearly there has been a massive barrage. And this was, the last one happened last night, just as President Trump was saying that he had agreed to this with President Putin. So I believe that President Putin is doing this on purpose. The attack of the American Philip Morris factory during this period is a statement to America that Russia can do whatever they want whenever they want it. And this latest attack that Kyiv and Ukraine experienced, this is, again, underscoring to the rest of the world that Russia does not care what the rest of the world says. It's going to do what it wants.
We see that NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte arrived in Kyiv after such a difficult night. How symbolic and at the same time, how practical is the visit of the NATO Secretary General under these circumstances? What message does this visit send to Russia regarding the level of NATO support for Ukraine?
I don't know how much support we're seeing for Ukraine. We know that the ongoing program, the Pearl program for purchasing weapons that began in July 2025 is ongoing. However, we also know that Ukraine has not received a lot of defensive weapons as it has been promised over the last couple of weeks and months. But is this a good visit? Absolutely. This is exactly the time to visit. In fact, this is the time that we are advocating in the United States and in other countries that world leaders should be coming to Ukraine now during the cold. Everybody should experience what everyday Ukrainians have to live with, whether you're in a building that's a tower in Kyiv, whether you're in a small village outside of any metropolitan center. The people of the world need to understand that this is what it's like in Ukraine now, already after 4 years of this kind of bombardment, and we need to have the world apply maximum pressure to Russia to stop this.
Mark Rutte addressed the Verkhovna Rada, stating that once a peace agreement is reached, armed forces, aircraft in the air, and naval support from NATO will immediately be present. The NATO Secretary General emphasized that the alliance does not merely seek an end to the war, but aims to ensure a durable and lasting peace. What exactly is meant by the immediate deployment of armed forces, air assets, and naval support after a peace agreement is concluded, in your opinion? Are we talking about deterrence forces, a peacekeeping mission, or another form of NATO military presence?
I think the most logical form is some kind of cover from these kind of bombardments that Ukraine has been experiencing. So we see that the Western Alliance has that ability. There have been several times over the last 3 years where the Western Alliance has mobilized its naval and air and land-based power to protect countries such as Israel from an attack, a bombardment of rockets and drones from Iran. Similarly, NATO does have the resources, if it were to want to deploy them, to shoot down as many attacks against Ukraine as are happening every night against Ukraine. And so that's what I anticipate when you hear naval, air, and land forces, some method of shooting down things that would potentially attack Ukraine. As far as individual soldiers, that's less of a conversation. As we know right now, we're not talking about that much of a ground war that NATO would want to participate in, but definitely having the personnel to operate surface-to-air defensive measures, as well as air-to-air or sea-to-air capabilities to shoot down anything that Russia might want to attack Ukraine in the future.
Andriy, and according to the Financial Times, Ukraine and the United States, the EU, have agreed on a response plan in case Russia violates a peace deal following consultations in Paris. The plan, I see that it's about a graduated response, a diplomatic warning, and necessary actions by Ukraine within 24 hours of systematic violations, followed if aggression continues by the involvement of the coalition of the willing. In the event of large-scale escalation, a coordinated military response with Western support, including U.S. forces, would be triggered within 72 hours. What is your assessment of this report? How realistic is such a rapid and coordinated allied response in practice?
Well, I return to my estimation of how any of this can come to be, which is not just an agreement between different world leaders. That's what we had in 1994 with the Budapest Memorandum. What we want to see instead is a ratified treaty. So not only having Ukraine, its representative parliament, sign on and ratify this treaty, but other countries as well. So this would not be something that would be subject to an individual leader's thoughts, whether it's the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the Chancellor of Germany. We want this agreement, if it's signed with other countries, to be ratified by their parliament. In the United States, that would require, after being signed by the President, that the agreement goes to the United States Senate, and that would be ratified. They would vote on it with a 2/3 majority, and then no president in the future would have the ability to change his mind about what they would have to do for Ukraine going forward. So for me, it's less about, or it's equally as important as to what's in the agreement, as to when and how all of these procedures are done. Even if we were to have an agreement announced today, how quickly could we have either parliaments ratify them? When would this come to be? Very similar to once an agreement was made in Minsk in 2015. We know that it took several months and years, and even still to this day, Russia would argue about what the next step would be. Here, we would have a ratified treaty that would concretely state what happens in which order.
Andriy, Rutte also stated that China, North Korea, and Iran continue to support Russia, but that the Russian economy is nevertheless suffering. Increased pressure on Russia's shadow fleet is also having an effect, and we will continue to pressure Russia and continue to support Ukraine. How tangible is the impact of sanctions and economic pressure on Russia's economy despite support from China, Iran, and North Korea?
Right. Well, China and North Korea are supplementing the military economy. The only part of the Russian economy that's actually functioning is the military economy, which means that there is quite possibly an enormous economic depression in Russia's future, which says that they need to continue this war because they have no other economy but this war. If this war were to stop tomorrow, North Korea and China would not help the economy of Russia. They are only interested in helping the military economy of Russia by either selling them material, helping them manufacture material, all in one big family connected of an evil enterprise. So not only is the conversation about, is this economic pressure something that could stop Russia, but it's also the consideration that if this war were to end, how bad would the Russian collapse be as well?
And what concrete indicators suggest that pressure, for example, on Russia's so-called shadow fleet is already producing practical results?
Well, we're systematically eliminating the people within the shadow fleet. So the shadow fleet, yes, is dominated by Russian flag tankers, but it's an entire system that Russia was running on behalf of other countries as well. That included controlling the oil wealth of Venezuela. That included the oil production of Iran. And we are seeing more and more of these partner countries within the shadow fleet system being taken out of the system. Venezuela is now not part of the shadow fleet system. Iran is on the brink of a collapse itself. And definitely its oil production is something that has suffered since the revolution time. Now we have just Russia trying to manage its own shadow fleet with some ships that are bought and paid for and having other countries' flags on them. But this is a completely Russian-run system, and the less partners you have, the less fluid oil reserves that you insert into the system, the more apt it is that even that system would collapse, just as the Russian economy.
Andriy, interesting information that Russia has handed proposals to the United States aimed at normalizing relations. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that if the US moves toward restoring relations with Russia, it would open very promising and, above all, mutually beneficial horizons of cooperation, particularly in areas that Trump administration considers priorities: critical minerals, rare earth elements, cooperation in the Arctic, artificial intelligence, space, and more. What risks does such cooperation entail under current conditions, and is President Trump likely to agree to such a course?
I'm sure that President Trump has been interested in signing some kind of agreement with Russia to revive the trade with that country. However, I mentioned earlier that Ukraine is looking for a future partnership that is not just an agreement with the United States and Western partners, but a ratified. That means gone through its parliament so that no president can change it. Much in the same way, many laws have been passed, not just in Europe, but in the United States, as to what can be done in terms of trade and economic relations with Russia after the war began in 2014, and then also after the full-fledged aggression began in 2022. Here, President Trump would have to come up against laws that exist on the books of the United States, and he would have to figure out who in his Congress would vote or would propose a vote to repeal those laws. So it's one thing for the president to want to do something, but in this instance, it's not just a presidential order that put limits on our trade. It was laws that were passed and ratified by Congress.
Andriy, about interesting topic, President Trump also commented on his alleged connection to the newly released Epstein files, calling it a terrible story. Why is a new batch of Epstein files emerging now? And how does this feed into the broader political context in the United States?
Well, it's certainly shaking a lot of things up around the world, not just the United States. We have seen many government officials in the United Kingdom and Europe losing their jobs because they were mentioned specifically as taking part in very unseemly affairs with Jeffrey Epstein and the women that he was trafficking. However, in the United States, we still have not seen that, other than some media personalities who in the last couple of days were told that they were no longer to be appearing on different television programs. Beyond that, the main people who are implicated in these files are the billionaires, the ones with hundreds of millions of dollars of wealth. Those people, we have not heard anything about taking a step back. We have people who own large football teams, very rich endeavors, who don't anticipate to change anything. Same with the people like Bill Gates, who's mentioned, as well as other government officials like the Commerce Secretary of the United States, who earlier said that he had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, and now it comes out that he had many interactions with Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein had been indicted for sex trafficking. So here we have what potentially could be a big scandal, but in the United States, unfortunately, we have not seen the repercussions that we are seeing in Europe and the United Kingdom.
And Andriy, about additional threats, on February 5th, 2026, the strategic arms reduction treaty between the United States and Russia expires. According to the Financial Times, the paper notes that this could become the first time in more than 50 years that the nuclear arsenals of the two countries are left without quantitative limits. What risks to global security does the expiration of the Strategic Arms Control Treaty between the United States and Russia pose?
Well, the problem with many of these arms reduction treaties is that they require the participation of both parties to go forward. Clearly, in this case, it was something that neither the United States nor the Russian Federation were interested in continuing. But I would say, especially at the international level, the biggest threat to nuclear proliferation is what happened to Ukraine, not just in 2022, but in 2014. The fact that Ukraine did turn over the largest nuclear arsenal ever in the history of peacemaking. It secured peace for the world by giving up its nuclear arsenal and was still invaded after the fact. We are going to be feeling the repercussions around the world, whether that's countries in Asia, countries in Africa. Nobody will feel safe until they have a nuclear weapon, and that in the end will make us less safe. So I think it's more important, less so for the START treaty to be renegotiated, and more so that we as an international community condemn what happens when a country like Ukraine is invaded and make sure that we continue the international order as laid out in the UN Charter.
Andriy, and the new information about the second round of talks with Ukraine, Putin's team for the second round of talks with Ukraine revealed, according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, the composition of the Russian negotiating team for the Abu Dhabi meeting on February remains unchanged, with GRU chief Igor Kostyukov set to lead the delegation. During the previous round, Russia's delegation also included the envoy of the Russian dictator, head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund Kirill Dmitriev, first deputy head of the GRU Information Directorate Alexander Zorin, and interpreter Ilya Kurepov, an employee of the Ministry of Defense's Logistic Center. So how made the military leadership of the delegation influence the tone and outcomes of the talks? What implications could this delegation structure have for Ukraine and its Western partners at the negotiating table?
The one major difference between all the parties is that Ukraine has sent a delegation of people who are very knowledgeable about all aspects that need to be negotiated, but they also have the full faith and backing of President Zelensky. Similarly, while Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner might not understand what's happening in Ukraine because they haven't visited Ukraine, they do have the full backing of President Trump. What we don't see is the Russian side having that full backing by President Putin, by sending lower level people, by not sending government ministers to represent him. He is, in a sense, putting people that he can dismiss, such as military leaders. He does not have to listen to whatever they agree to, and this makes this process even more hurtful for the Ukrainian people. The fact that they might be meeting, they might come into an agreement, but this does not guarantee President Putin will abide by it.
Andriy, thank you so much for this conversation and your insightful thoughts. Today we were joined by Andriy Dobriansky, Chair of UN Affairs at the Ukrainian World Congress. Andriy, thank you again and see you.
Thank you so much.